They always said family was everything, but they never warned me that sometimes family could be the very thing that tried to destroy you from within. I still remember the weight of that moment in the gleaming lobby of Meridian Financial Group, watching my dreams crumble before they'd even had a chance to take flight. The marble floors reflected the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I sat there in my carefully pressed blazer, the one I'd bought on sale 3 months earlier specifically for this interview. My worn but polished flats felt out of place among the designer heels clicking past me, but I'd told myself that competence mattered more than clothes. My name is Nadia Martinez, and for 32 years, I'd been the family disappointment. Not because I'd failed at anything significant, but because I'd never been given the chance to succeed. While my younger sister Isabella basked in our parents' adoration, I'd raised 2 beautiful children, mostly on my own, worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, and somehow managed to earn my business degree through night school. But none of that seemed to matter when Isabella walked into a room. The Meridian interview had represented everything I'd been working toward. Senior financial analyst, 6-figure salary, benefits that would finally give my kids the stability they deserved. I'd spent weeks preparing, memorizing market trends, practicing my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly even while making breakfast for Emma and Lucas. At 8 and 10, they'd grown used to seeing their mom hunched over textbooks at the kitchen table, but they'd also learned to believe that hard work eventually paid off. I should have known something was wrong when Mr. Richardson's assistant kept glancing at her phone during our meeting. Should have recognized the shift in his demeanor when he excused himself to take a call halfway through my presentation. But I was so focused on delivering my prepared remarks about portfolio optimization and risk management that I missed the warning signs entirely. "Miss Martinez," he'd said when he returned, his professional smile notably cooler, "I have to ask, are you on good terms with your family? I've received some interesting information about your character." The words hit me like ice water. I'd managed to stammer through the rest of the interview, but I could see in his eyes that whatever poison had been poured into his ear had already done its damage. Walking out of that gleaming tower, I felt the familiar sting of being sabotaged by the very people who were supposed to support me. My phone buzzed as I reached the sidewalk. The family group chat, the one that mostly served as a platform for my parents to shower Isabella with praise while treating me like an afterthought. Mom had written, "Just called that hiring manager at Meridian. Told him not to waste his time with someone as unreliable as Nadia. He deserves to know what he'd be getting into." Dad's response came immediately. "Good thinking, Maria." Told him he should interview Isabella instead. She actually knows how to present herself professionally. Then Isabella herself. "Don't worry, sis. I'll make sure to put in a good word for myself when I go in tomorrow. Someone in this family should represent us properly." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been imagining how I'd tell Emma and Lucas about the new opportunities this job would bring. Now I was standing on 5th Avenue watching my sister walk out of the same building, practically glowing with satisfaction. "How did your interview go?" Isabella called out, her voice dripping with false concern. She looked perfect as always, her designer suit immaculate, her smile sharp as a blade. "Oh wait, let me guess. They decided to go with someone more qualified?" She held up a manila envelope, the Meridian logo clearly visible. "Funny thing, they called me this morning. Said they'd received some concerning information about their previous candidate and wondered if I might be available for a chat." She tapped the envelope against her manicured nails. Turns out, I was exactly what they were looking for. The rage that rose in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not the quiet frustration of being overlooked or the dull ache of constant criticism. This was molten fury, the kind that changes your molecular structure and leaves you fundamentally different than you were before. "You had no right," I whispered, but Isabella was already walking away, her heels clicking a victory march on the pavement. "The best person won, Nadia. That's how the world works." I stood there watching her disappear into the crowd, and something shifted inside me. For 32 years, I'd absorbed their cruelty, made excuses for their behavior, told myself that family meant accepting people as they were. But standing in the shadow of that glass tower, I realized that acceptance didn't have to mean allowing them to destroy me. The next few weeks passed in a haze of barely contained humiliation. Isabella made sure to visit our parents' house in Westchester every few days, each time bringing news stories about her success at Meridian. She'd leave her employee badge on the coffee table just long enough for everyone to notice, talk loudly on the phone about her important meetings and influential colleagues. "The partners love me," she'd announced to whoever was in earshot. "They're already talking about fast-tracking me for promotion. Some people just have what it takes, you know?" Our parents hung on every word. Mom would beam with pride, telling neighbors about her successful daughter, while somehow managing never to mention that she had two. Dad would nod approvingly and make comments about natural talent and leadership qualities. I'd sit there with Emma and Lucas, watching this performance with growing disgust. My children had learned to stay quiet during these visits, sensing the undercurrent of hostility that surrounded me in that house. But I could see the confusion in their eyes, the way they tried to understand why their grandmother hugged Aunt Isabella but barely acknowledged them. Why doesn't Grandma like us? Emma had asked one evening as we drove home from what would be our last family dinner. I'd looked at her in the rearview mirror, this beautiful, intelligent child who deserved so much better than the toxic legacy I'd been carrying. It's not about us, sweetheart. Some people have forgotten how to see what's really important. But privately, I was planning. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every cruel laugh was being catalogued and stored away. Isabella thought her success at Meridian made her untouchable, but she'd grown careless in her arrogance. She talked too freely about her workplace escapades, boasted about cutting corners and manipulating situations to her advantage. She had no idea that I was listening to every word. Meridian Financial Group prided itself on integrity and collaboration. Their mission statement, prominently displayed on their website, emphasized trust, accountability, and ethical leadership. I spent hours researching the company culture, reading employee reviews, learning about their recent initiatives to promote workplace transparency. Isabella might have stolen my opportunity, but she clearly hadn't bothered to understand the values of the organization she now worked for. I started spending my mornings at the Starbucks across from Meridian's downtown office, ostensibly working on freelance bookkeeping projects but actually observing the rhythm of the company. I learned when people arrived, when they left, which executives preferred which coffee shops for their informal meetings. Isabella had always been a creature of habit, and I quickly identified her patterns. She arrived late most mornings, usually looking slightly disheveled and clutching an oversized coffee. She took extended lunches, often returning with shopping bags that she'd stash under her desk. Most tellingly, she spent a lot of time on personal calls during work hours, often stepping into empty conference rooms where she thought no one could hear her. During one of these calls, which I overheard while pretending to wait for the elevator, she was laughing about how she'd borrowed ideas from a colleague's presentation and presented them as her own during the morning meeting. "These people are so naive," she was saying. "They think everyone's as honest as they are. It's like taking candy from children." I started documenting everything, not with recordings or photographs, nothing that could be construed as stalking or harassment. Just careful observations noted in a journal, patterns of behavior that painted a picture of someone who fundamentally misunderstood what Meridian stood for. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came in early November. Mom called to inform me that Isabella's team was giving a major presentation to potential clients and their families were invited to attend. It was Meridian's quarterly showcase, an event where they highlighted their most promising talent and allowed employees' loved ones to see them in action. "Isabella specifically requested that we come," Mom said, her voice practically vibrating with pride. "She's going to be presenting to some very important people. We'll finally get to see her in her element." Dad got on the phone to add his own commentary. "She's worked so hard for this opportunity. Unlike some people, she knows how to make the most of her chances." The barb was clearly directed at me, but for the first time in my life, their criticism rolled right off. I had something much more important to focus on. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'd love to come support Isabella. Can I bring Emma and Lucas?" There was a pause. Mom and Dad never showed much interest in their grandchildren, but they couldn't very well exclude them from a family event. "I suppose that would be fine," Mom said reluctantly. "Just make sure they're well behaved. This is an important professional event." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing Emma and Lucas for what they might witness. I didn't tell them exactly what I was planning, but I wanted them to understand that sometimes adults needed to face consequences for their actions, just like children did. "Remember how we've talked about integrity?" I said one evening as we worked on homework together. "About how important it is to be honest and do your own work." They nodded solemnly. My children had been raised with strong values, partly because I'd seen firsthand what happened when people grew up without them. Sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and sometimes those choices eventually catch up with them. If that happens tomorrow night, I want you to remember that truth is important, even when it's uncomfortable. The Meridian Building's auditorium was even more impressive than their lobby. Soaring ceilings, state-of-the-art presentation technology, and seating for about 200 people. The company had spared no expense in creating an environment that reflected their commitment to excellence. Isabella's name was prominently featured on the program as the lead presenter for the Strategic Growth Initiative. She'd apparently been working on this presentation for weeks, according to our parents, who couldn't stop talking about how the partners had specifically chosen her to represent the firm's future direction. We took seats in the middle section, close enough to see everything clearly but not so close as to draw attention. Emma and Lucas sat quietly beside me, taking in the formal atmosphere with wide eyes. They'd never seen their mother in a professional setting like this, and I could tell they were impressed by the gravity of the occasion. Isabella looked stunning, as always. Her presentation suit was clearly expensive, her hair and makeup flawless. When she took the stage, she commanded attention effortlessly. Our parents beamed from their seats in the front row, Mom actually wiping away tears of pride. But I could see what others couldn't. Isabella's confidence was a carefully constructed facade, impressive from a distance but revealing cracks up close. She moved through her slides quickly, not allowing time for detailed questions. Her explanations were surface level, hitting key buzzwords but lacking the depth that would come from genuine understanding. About 15 minutes into her presentation, one of the senior partners raised his hand. Isabella, could you walk us through the risk assessment methodology you mentioned? I'd like to understand how you arrived at these projected returns. I watched my sister's face change, saw the moment of panic she tried to hide behind a bright smile. Of course, Mr. Chen, the methodology is, well, it's quite comprehensive. We use standard industry practices to evaluate. She was floundering, clearly trying to buy time while she figured out how to answer a question about work she hadn't actually done herself. The audience was beginning to notice, shifting in their seats as her explanation became more convoluted and less coherent. That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "I think there might be some confusion about who actually developed this methodology." Every head in the room turned toward me. Isabella's face went white, then flushed red. Our parents looked mortified, Dad starting to rise from his seat as if he could somehow stop what was about to happen. "I'm Isabella's sister, Nadia Martinez," I continued, my voice steady and professional. "I was recently interviewed for a position here at Meridian. And I couldn't help but notice that many of the concepts in tonight's presentation are remarkably similar to the portfolio analysis I developed during my candidacy." The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Chen looked from me to Isabella, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean by that?" "I mean that my sister has apparently presented my work as her own. The risk assessment framework, the projected return calculations, even the specific language about market volatility, all of that came from research I conducted over several months while preparing for my interview with your firm." Isabella finally found her voice. That's completely ridiculous. Nadia is just jealous because she didn't get the job. She's trying to sabotage me because she can't stand to see someone else succeed." But her protest sounded hollow in the face of my calm certainty. Mr. Richardson, who had conducted my original interview, was now standing in the back of the room, his expression troubled. "Actually," he said, addressing the crowd, "I remember Miss Martinez's interview quite clearly. She presented some very innovative approaches to portfolio optimization. Isabella, would you mind explaining how you developed these same concepts independently?" I watched my sister crumble in real time. Her confident facade melted away, leaving behind someone who looked very young and very foolish. She tried to maintain her composure, but the questions kept coming from different corners of the room. "Isabella," said another partner, "this presentation was supposed to represent 6 weeks of original research. Are you telling us you developed these complex financial models in addition to your regular duties?" "And what about the McKinsey report you cited?" asked someone else. "I've read that study, and some of your conclusions seem to contradict their findings. Could you walk us through your analysis?" Each question drove her deeper into a hole she couldn't climb out of. It became clear to everyone in the room that she didn't understand her own presentation, couldn't explain her methodology, and had no grasp of the underlying principles she'd been discussing so confidently just moments earlier. Our parents were frantically whispering to each other, Mom looking around the room as if searching for an escape route. Dad's face had gone purple with rage, but for once, his anger wasn't directed at me. They were finally seeing Isabella as she truly was, stripped of their protective delusions. "I think we need to continue this conversation privately, Mr. Chen announced, effectively ending the presentation. "Isabella, please see me in my office immediately after we conclude tonight's program." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Other presenters took the stage, but the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly. People kept glancing at our section, whispers following us wherever we went during the networking reception. Isabella had disappeared immediately after her presentation, presumably to face the music in Mr. Chen's office. Our parents tried to approach me during the reception, but I kept Emma and Lucas close and avoided being cornered. I wasn't interested in their excuses or their attempts to minimize what had just happened. As we were leaving, I overheard 2 Meridian employees talking near the elevator. "I can't believe she thought she could get away with that," one was saying. "Did you see how she couldn't answer basic questions about her own methodology?" "The really sad part is that the woman who originally developed those concepts seemed genuinely brilliant," the other replied. "What kind of family dynamic creates that situation?" Emma tugged on my sleeve as we waited for our car. "Mom, was Aunt Isabella lying?" I looked down at my daughter, this perceptive child who deserved honest answers. "Yes, sweetheart. She was presenting work that didn't belong to her as if she'd done it herself. That's called plagiarism, and it's a very serious thing in the professional world. Is she going to get in trouble?" "I think she already islanded." The call came the next morning. Isabella, sobbing and barely coherent, begging me to call Meridian and tell them it had all been a misunderstanding. Please, Nadia, you have to help me. They're talking about termination. They want to review all my work to see what else I might have borrowed. My career is over. I listened to her plead for several minutes before I finally spoke. Isabella, do you remember what you said to me outside that building the day you stole my interview? You said the best person won. That's how the world works. This is different, it's different. No, it's not. You spent our entire lives believing you were entitled to anything you wanted, regardless of who you hurt to get it. You convinced our parents that I was worthless, that I didn't deserve the same opportunities or support they gave you. You took credit for my work and thought you could build a career on that foundation. I never meant for it to go this far. I was just trying to impress people. By claiming someone else's accomplishments as your own, by fundamentally misrepresenting who you are and what you're capable of. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Isabella, I spent 32 years watching you succeed while I struggled, and I told myself it was just bad luck or poor timing. But last night, everyone in that room saw the truth. You're not more talented or deserving than anyone else. You've just been protected from consequences your entire life. She hung up on me, but I wasn't surprised. Isabella had never learned to accept responsibility for her actions because our parents had never required it of her. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Mom, her voice shaking with fury. How could you do this to your own sister? How could you humiliate her like that in front of all those people? I didn't humiliate her, Mom. I told the truth. Isabella humiliated herself by lying about her qualifications and plagiarizing other people's work. She made a mistake, Nadia. People make mistakes, but what you did was cruel and vindictive. What I did was protect the integrity of work I'd spent months developing. What I did was refuse to let her build a career on my foundation while I watched from the sidelines. She's your sister. And I'm yours, daughter, though you've never seemed to remember that. The words came out with a finality that surprised even me. For 32 years, you and Dad have treated me like I was disposable while elevating Isabella, no matter what she did. You sabotaged my job interview rather than let me succeed on my own merits. You taught her that she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. That's not fair, Nadia. We've always tried to treat you girls equally. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Equally, Mom, when I graduated with honors from business school, you sent me a card. When Isabella got a C+ in her marketing class, you threw her a party. When I got pregnant with Emma, you asked me what I was going to do about it. When Isabella got engaged to that guy she'd known for 3 months, you started planning the wedding. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. That's not how I remember it, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Of course it's not. You've spent so many years rewriting history to justify your favorites that you actually believe your own fiction. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter with each word. But I'm done pretending that any of this is normal or healthy. I'm done making excuses for people who consistently choose to hurt me. What does that mean? It means I'm protecting my children from the same toxic dynamic that nearly destroyed me. Emma and Lucas deserve grandparents who love them unconditionally, not people who will favor some grandchildren over others based on arbitrary preferences. You're overreacting, Nadia. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Actually, I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in years. I'm done, Mom. I'm done with the guilt trips and the manipulation and the constant message that I'm somehow less valuable than Isabella. I'm done subjecting my children to people who see them as afterthoughts. I hung up before she could respond, before she could try to guilt me back into the familiar patterns of dysfunction. Later that day, Mr. Richardson called. Meridian had terminated Isabella's employment immediately after a review revealed multiple instances of questionable work and misrepresented qualifications. More importantly, they wanted to offer me the position I'd originally interviewed for, along with an additional title recognition for the innovative framework I'd developed. We should have recognized your talent from the beginning, he said. We allowed outside interference to cloud our judgment, and we'd like to make that right. I accepted, but not before making it clear that my decision was based on the opportunity itself, not on any desire for revenge against my sister. Isabella's downfall had been entirely of her own making. I'd simply refused to continue protecting her from the natural consequences of her choices. Emma and Lucas were waiting for me when I got home. Homework spread across the kitchen table where I'd spent so many late nights studying for my degree. "How was your day, Mom?" Emma asked, looking up from her math worksheet. I sat down beside them, looking at these two incredible children who had been my motivation through every difficult moment of the past decade. "It was a very good day, sweetheart. I got some news that's going to make things easier for our family." "Are we going to be okay?" Lucas asked. At 10, he'd already learned to worry about things children shouldn't have to think about. "We're going to be better than okay," I told him. "We're going to be happy." 6 months later, I was settled into my new role at Meridian, working with a team that valued my contributions and challenged me to grow professionally. Emma and Lucas had adjusted well to our improved circumstances, and more importantly, they were growing up in an environment free from the toxic dynamics that had shaped my childhood. I occasionally heard updates about Isabella through mutual acquaintances. She'd moved back in with our parents, struggling to find work in her field after word spread about her termination from Meridian. Our parents had apparently mounted a campaign to rehabilitate her reputation, calling everyone they knew to explain that she'd been unfairly targeted and sabotaged by jealous colleagues. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles, but I also felt no obligation to rescue her from consequences she'd created for herself. Isabella was an adult who had made adult choices, and she would have to find her own way forward. The hardest part had been accepting that I would probably never have the family relationships I'd once hoped for. Emma and Lucas asked about their grandparents occasionally, but they'd adapted to their absence more easily than I'd expected. Children are remarkably resilient when they're freed from environments where they're made to feel less than. One evening in late spring, I was reviewing quarterly reports on our deck while Emma and Lucas played in the yard. The sun was setting over our small but comfortable house, the one I'd been able to purchase with my new salary and signing bonus. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, and it was filled with genuine love and mutual respect. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Isabella, trying one more time to establish contact. "I know you hate me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to be special, wanted to matter. I made mistakes, but you're the only family I have left." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for the woman my sister might have become if she'd learned different lessons growing up. But wanting to matter didn't justify destroying other people. Feeling insecure didn't excuse taking credit for work you didn't do. And being family didn't create an obligation to accept abuse or enable destructive behavior. I deleted the message without responding. Emma called my name from the swing set, asking me to push her higher. I put away my work and walked over to my children, these two perfect people who had taught me what unconditional love actually looked like. They had never made me prove my worth or compete for their affection. They had never weaponized their love or used it to manipulate my behavior. As I pushed Emma higher and higher, listening to her delighted laughter mix with Lucas's as he spun on the tire swing, I realized something profound. I hadn't just escaped my toxic family dynamics. I had broken a generational cycle that might have otherwise continued through my children and their children. Standing there in my own backyard, surrounded by the life I'd built through my own efforts and sustained by relationships based on genuine respect and love, I understood that the greatest revenge wasn't humiliating Isabella in that auditorium. It wasn't taking the job she'd tried to steal or watching her face the consequences of her choices. The greatest revenge was this: building a life so full of authentic joy and genuine accomplishment that their opinions no longer had the power to touch me. I had spent 32 years believing that family approval was essential to my worth as a person. Now I knew that the only approval that mattered was my own, and the love I shared with people who saw me clearly and valued me completely. The glass tower where Isabella had fallen from grace was visible in the distance, its windows reflecting the golden hour light. But I wasn't looking at it anymore. I was looking at Emma's face as she soared through the air, fearless and radiant, growing up in a world where she would never have to question whether she deserved to fly.